Hey friends, it's Laura with Laura B. Flosstube. Welcome or welcome back. So it is time for block 5 and 6 for the Bloom Quilt Sew Along. I have my bags out and we're just going to match up our fabrics and interfacing and then get started sewing our shapes to the interfacing. So I'm going to swing you down here and we're going to match up some shapes and fabric. All right, this is block 5 that I'm pulling out of the bag. And as we've done the last few times, this is my background that I'm just going to lay there, but I know that I'm going to press this before I go too much further with it. Now, some of these shapes, when they were on my big piece of interfacing, I left them all together. So I'm going to cut those apart. I am going to reference my cutting guide because block 5 has 2 big circle flowers and with some leaves. So it looks like the leaves are the same on each flower. So 2 and 2. So these are all of our leaves, and yeah, so we got to make a decision. So we want the smaller leaves to be this plaid and the bigger leaves to be the floral. We're going to go ahead and cut those apart. And we're going to put those on the design board. And then we have 2 centers and 2 flowers. So we're going to go and match those up too, on how we want them to look. I think that the orange would look really good on the pink and the yellow with the blue. That's how I want to do mine. So we will keep that in mind as we're progressing. The yellow and orange are for the smaller circles. It's the centers of our flowers, and the blue and pink are for the larger circles for our actual flowers. All right, so here's block 6. I'm going to grab me another design board here just so I don't get these mixed up. Love having multiple design boards. If you haven't checked out my tutorial on how to make them, then make sure you do that. All right, so you might remember way back when we were cutting, I decided to leave my fabric together when I was cutting it out for all of the petals. So here, this will fit right here real nicely. So that's just going to go on the design board and wait. And here is the background. All right, and then we have the yellow center for our flower and the green leaves. And this is 1 piece of fabric as well. So I'm just going to put those on there, and those are hanging out on the design board. Now, it doesn't really matter to me which block I do first. I got to get them both done this week, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and start with the block 6 because the design board's on top. Now, remember when we're doing our applique, or I guess when we're sewing our shapes to our fabric, we want to decrease our stitch length just a little bit more. So I moved it down to 1.8. I mentioned in the last video, it's never a bad idea, for a reminder though, that if you keep your fingers on the plate of your machine, you can apply a little bit of pressure and just make sure that fabric turns around and you can keep your needle right on that line. If you're having problems with that, then slow down and practice. Practice, practice, practice. That's really what it's all about. Now I'm using my piecing foot today because I just got done recording the border video. And I said in the last video, I switch back and forth between my open toe foot and my piecing foot. Both of them work really well. As long as you can see where your needle is right there in the middle, then that's the kind of foot you want. Now we have a circle to do. I'm going to go ahead and cut these apart just because this is a big piece of fabric. I'm going to be flipping around there several times. Now this is the other block. I'm going to go ahead and get started on it. Just so that I have to cut that thread. I'm going to stop right here and cut it. Put it on the board. I'm sure it's hard to tell in the video, but I do have pressure from my fingers against that plate. That's what's causing that circle to just kind of spin around there the way it is. Don't forget that you do want to sew over the beginning of your seam where you start going around the shape, because we're not back stitching or anything, so that overlapping seam will give your shape the stability that you need. So when you turn it out, it won't come apart on you. All of our shapes are sewn, so it is time to turn them out. Okay, so for turning out our shapes, remember we want to obviously cut them out first. And around these leaves, on the tips of them, I'm going to angle that out and kind of angle around those just to make sure I don't have very much bulk of my fabric around those points, because the less bulk of fabric that I have around those points, the better that point's going to look when I turn it out. So I'm going to cut these out and then we'll start turning. Okay, so I have all the shapes cut out, and I'm just going to start using my little Fiskars scissors. And I'm going to go ahead and do block 6 first, just because it's pretty straightforward. I just have 4 circles and 2 leaves, or I guess 4 leaves. And then I'm going to show you a few tricks though for the other blocks, so stay tuned for that. Let's do the circles first. Grab our 2-point turner. I stick my finger between the interfacing and the fabric and then just give it a good twist, and flip. Someone asked me, commented on the last video, how do you turn those so quickly? Well, the short answer is lots and lots of practice. Yeah, my stepdaughter, when she was little, she'd always tell me, you're so good at this. Why are you so good at this? I was like, well, honey, you're seeing, you know, the result of lots and lots of practice. You're not seeing the struggles as you're first learning a new art form or any new topic. It just takes time and dedication, I guess, is what I would say. I just finished my undergrad this last May, which, 20 years later than when I started it, I guess. About 20 years later than I should have finished it. But I took a psychology class, and they were talking about how any type of skill, it takes about 10,000 hours, 10 years, 10,000 hours to develop an expert status in that field. And that's not just, oh, I started doing this and 10 years later I'm going to be great at it. It's 10 years of dedicated practice. So I would just, if you're struggling with certain types of techniques or skills when it comes to quilting, I would just encourage you to keep going with it and keep practicing and dedicate some time. One of the things that I did when I first started quilting, which I think this was probably the best decision I could have ever made, I started joining just different types of mystery quilts and using fabric that I didn't pay a lot of money for, In fact, I was getting some fabric at like the senior center here in town. It supports the senior center, and it's just, you know, fabric that people have brought in and they sell it for like really cheap. So I was using a lot of fabric that I didn't pay much money for, and I was doing a bunch of mystery quilts with the mindset that if I didn't like the finished design, I would just donate the quilt. Or you can always gift it, because just because you don't like it doesn't mean, you know, someone that you know may love it. But I joined all these mystery quilts, sew-alongs, and it was one of the best things that I did because it got me out of my comfort zone. It allowed me to try a lot of different techniques and pick up a lot of tips and get the support of the other people that were doing the same quilt at the same time. And you really do learn a lot in a short amount of time when you join in on something like that. And I hope that this is helping some of you, and you are learning some tips and tricks along the way, and just seeing a different perspective and a different way of doing the same task. I think that as long as you get the same result, then it doesn't really matter how you got there. You just have to figure out what works best for you. Now, all of these leaves look really good, so I think I'm going to leave them just the way they are. And so the pieces for block 5 are all turned, and we'll move on to block 6. And again, I just use my little Fiskars scissors and just run that right along that interfacing till I get between the interfacing and the fabric and cut my slit. Same thing for the circle. We're going to leave the petals to last because I have a little trick on those for you. I also want to point out in the last video I did a lot of, I guess it was block 1 and 2 actually. I put a lot of background music in on it because I thought, I hate watching videos where they're not talking and they're doing something and I'm watching and there's nothing going on, nothing to, you know, no music or sound. But I had a few people comment that the music was distracting, and I get that. So, you know, I'm doing these videos on quilting, and I obviously have done a lot of quilting at this point, but I'm also in the process learning to do the video editing. And so I've been trying different, you know, things with that and figuring out different things that I can add in and do to make the videos more interesting and just gain new skills for video editing. That's been kind of fun. Definitely using a video editing program outside of YouTube because I found that the video editing inside of YouTube isn't quite enough, and it's a little cumbersome. All right, so I think these leaves look good too. Good enough. All right, so let me grab a couple little tools and I'll be back to show you what we're going to do with those petals. I mentioned this tool in the last video as something that I sometimes use, but I thought this is the perfect one to show you how this works. So this is the Turn It All tool, and these petals, when you look at the sew along guide, you are not going to see this rectangle end. You only see the rounded end, and all these rectangles go underneath your circle, so you're never going to see them, right? So what I'm going to do with these petals, just to make my life a lot quicker, I'm going to cut off that rectangled end, just where that seam is at. And I'll do another one that's like really close, so don't worry yet. And then I'm going to take the biggest of the Turn It All tools and slip it between the fabric and the interfacing and use the stick that's included with the Turn It All and poke it right out. It's really that fast. I did not speed up the video. And then I just take my 2-point turner, run it around that rounded end, and that's done. So I'm going to do one more. I have a bunch of them to do. I'm going to go ahead and cut all my little ends. So you're just cutting right inside that squared off end. And so if you haven't sewn yours yet, just don't sew that end. And they don't necessarily have to be straight. I would keep them, you know, fairly straight. They don't have to be super, super straight. So again, we're just sticking this tool in between the fabric and the interfacing, sticking it's a dowel rod between inside that, and our petal is turned out. All right, so let me bring you in closer so you can see it even better. So you have two pieces to the turn it all tool. There's the PVC pipe and a dowel rod. So you take the PVC pipe, stick it between the interfacing and the fabric, just like that. And then take the dowel rod from that end, poke the fabric down and through. Now you can do this with any like tube shape. These were actually designed for doing long tubes. So like if you are a bag maker, or you make some tote bags or things like that for Christmas time or any time, and you start doing the handles and you have these long tubes that, you know, you sew them down and everything, and then they're just not very fun to turn out. This tool is the bomb. And I did put a link in the last video to this tool on Amazon. I guess I should have done one in like the normal way to show you the difference of time, but I think you can see that there is no way I could have turned that shape out that quickly and easily the normal way. So now all my petals are turned out. I'll take those all over and get them pressed, and then I'll meet you back at the cutting table to lay out our blocks. Since we're kind of talking about just different techniques and different tips today in this video, I thought I would show you one other thing that I do sometimes. Instead of using the glue, I use some free fuse from Quilter Select. So I'm going to actually lay out block 6 using the free fuse. And the reason I do that is just because sometimes I'm impatient and I want to be able to sew it immediately, and I don't want to wait for the glue to dry. So we're going to lay out block 6 using the Quilter Select free fuse, and I'm going to show you a few of the things that I do to make sure that I don't make a mess on my ironing board and I don't make a mess on my block. All right, so I have all my pieces for the flower, and I have referenced the picture so I know what it's supposed to look like. I know that the stem goes right up the middle of the block, and then the petals go here, and then I have my flower up here. So I have Quilter Select Free Fuse in this little bottle, and you want to be kind of careful with it because you don't want to fuse everywhere, right? You just want to fuse where you want to fuse. And it's basically a heat-activated glue. So I'm just going to run my stem up here. Now I know that I have a little bit more than I should have on there. So I have a piece of fabric, just random fabric, that I had laying actually in the trash can, that I'm going to run over that. And I'll pull this fabric up. Move it up so I can get the rest of the stem. I'm also pressing this, I also have this Teflon sheet underneath that I use just to make sure none of that free fuse goes through the fabric onto my ironing board. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of lay out the flower the way that I want it. And I'll obviously check those measurements to make sure that it is not too big. Now I haven't put any of the free fuse under any of the shapes I'm laying out right now, because I'm going to wait till I get everything lined up and where I want it, obviously, before I start fusing things down. Because it does, I mean, it fuses and then it's there. All right, so I have my 8.5 inch square just to make sure. Yeah, that looks really good. I may move a couple of these petals a little bit on the flower. And, you know, we can adjust this as we go along. So I'm just going to leave that petal the way it is and lift it up a little bit. And it does take, you know, a few seconds for that free fuse to fuse. I'm just putting a little sprinkle underneath there. And I could have done both those leaves at once. I didn't have to do them the way I did. I'm going to do a couple of these petals at a time, maybe 3. If you think that you're getting free fuse on your fabric in places that you don't, that aren't covered, then make sure you use something on top because you don't want that glue on your iron. And it's just like a really fine powder. And then as soon as I'm done fusing this, I can take it right to the machine and sew it because everything is stuck down. Ta-da! So the free fuse is definitely a product that I use from time to time. Like I said, if I am doing something that I want to be able to applique it immediately, it comes in really handy. And then you can just start appliquing your block and you are good to go. You want to reference the Bloom Sew Along Guide and to find the layout for your blocks. I also have links to her blog post down below that you can use to lay out your blocks and get the exact measurements that she used. I mentioned before, I'm just kind of going to wing it. And so I'm going to lay my blocks out in the way that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and use the free fuse for the other block too. I have went ahead and fused the circles together. Well, I put the powder on there. I haven't actually fused them yet. So they're not fused onto my background yet, but they are fused onto one another. And they can be off to the side now. And then just going to decide, I think I'm going to put the plaid ones on the taller flower. Oh, no, I want them on the smaller flower because of the size. Should have looked more closely when I was cutting my stems, but this would be cute. That'll be fine. And I want them offset, so that's what I'm going to do. All right, so this is kind of how I want my block laid out. Just want to check it and make sure I am within that 8.5 inch square size that we need to target. And I'm going to start by fusing the flowers. I think I'll get them both on there at once. You want to hold this, you know, between 5 and 10 seconds. Don't scorch your fabric, depending on how hot your iron is. And then I'm going to move my leaves off of here so I can do these stems. And again, for the stems, I am going to put another piece of fabric over it because I do know that this powder isn't perfectly on just the bias tape. I know I have a little bit on the background too. It does wash out, so it's not like for, you know, permanent bonding. So it will come out. All right, so there's that stem. And let's do this one. It's really easy to sew through this free fuse too. It doesn't mess up your needle or anything. It's not like sticky. It's not tacky or gluey or anything. If gluey's a word, I'm not sure if it is. Okay, that should be good. And then we'll put our little leaves on here. The first time I used this free fuse was actually, I got some in the Missouri Star Christmas box, the Jenny's box. And I had never heard of it or used it before. And I was like, wow, this stuff is cool. I got all my leaves underneath there. That's an awesome one too. I don't know if this is that much faster than just gluing the pieces down, but I know that once I am done pressing these on there, I am ready to applique with no dry time on that glue. So that is definitely a time saver for me. So here's my second block, and we'll be off to the sewing machine. Back in the sewing machine, I have changed my thread to be the dark brown that I'm using on this quilt. And then I've also changed it to a zigzag stitch. I have a 1.8 width and a 0.9 length. And then I also changed it to my clear open toe foot because it has that nice little triangle in it that I've shown in the last couple of videos. And because, well, the needle doesn't like it very much if you leave that piecing foot on, because you'll break that needle when you hit the plate, when you hit the foot. So I'm just going to applique these down. And if I think of anything, I'll add it in. Otherwise, I'm just going to let you watch me sew. Okay, so on this flower, one thing that I do just kind of save myself some time, you can kind of look and see how this circle is overlapping on your petals. So instead of starting and stopping after each petal, I will start under the circle and do my zigzags around and keep going around and around and around. So I'm going to start with this one here because it looks like it's on top. And start the zigzag back here under where I know it's way under that circle. You're not going to see that end. And I don't need a back stitch or anything there either because we'll be sewing over that with that yellow circle. I'm going to continue around my petals. When I get up to about there, I can jump back and go to the next petal. Now when you have half curves like this, I usually stop about in the middle of the curve just to adjust and then continue around that curve until you get to the straight stretch again. And then once again, stop. Going around. think there's 8 petals on this flower. Now, when I did that free fuse on the circle, I just put it right in the middle. So that's why I can get all those edges up as I'm moving around with the petals. So it's definitely still secured to my block, but it's not in the way. Now, before I do that circle, since I started underneath, I'm going to go ahead and cut that tail so it's not in the way. And I'll use my stopping stitch to start. Like a stay stitch, I guess. Has a little knot for me without having the back stitch. And then I'll go around my circle. Now after I get the circle done, I will trim all of my threads, front and back. Press it. And then we will cut them down to the appropriate size. The last thing we need to do is just trim up our blocks to the 8.5-inch square. And I like to have at least a 1/2 inch at the top of my block. So I'm going to just move this a little bit. These flowers are so happy. They are almost ready to be in the quilt. We're gonna have to wait for a couple more friends to join them though before we do the row. At least that's how I'm doing mine. You do yours however you want. So here's block 5. Oh, actually that's block 6. I'm sorry. There's block 6. And then here will be block 5. I'm just gonna kind of see, this is a 3/4 inch. Yeah, that's pretty good. All right. I can put these on the design wall and talk about our blocks. Back on the design wall, I've added block 5 and 6 to the wall, so you can kind of see how this is going to start looking with the other row that we've already put together. Now, I am very happy with how this is turning out. I obviously didn't catch that I used the same pink for this flower and these petals, but it's okay because it's going to have some of these shapes between them to break up that fabric, and I'm really okay with it because I like the fabric, so whatever. So anyway, that's kind of where we're at now. So we have the first 6 blocks for the Bloom Quilt Sew Along done, and we will start working on blocks 7 and 8 next week, and then I'll put that second row all together. I probably won't do a video on assembling the second row because you can just refer to the first row and get the tips and tricks on that one. So just to recap today's video though, a few things that I showed you. Definitely use your 2-point turner to smooth out your shapes. And then that free fuse is really cool. If you don't want to wait for the glue to dry, get some free fuse. It's Quilter's Select Free Fuse. And then, most importantly, check out this Turn It All tool. Now, I put the link on the last video just because I told you sometimes I used it. But today I showed you how I use it to get these petals turned out super quick. So anytime that you can find a tool that helps you turn these shapes out quicker, that is worth its weight in gold. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you picked up a new tip or trick along the way. And thank you so much for joining me. Make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't. Share the videos out. And until next time, happy stitching.